Hello, everybody. I'm Jackie K. Cooper here with the stupendous Karin Slaughter, New York Times bestselling author, and we're going to spend an hour talking about your latest book, False Witness. So, Karin, I am so glad to see you. It's like
it's been a long time. We haven't seen each other in person in a while.
We're like that movie. I don't know if you ever saw it. Same time next year.
Yep.
We just meet up once a year.
That's right. Usually for the Decatur Book Festival.
Yes.
That's right. Yeah. Well, and I'm a big fan of the Decatur Book Festival and Decatur DeKalb Libraries. And I like to say hello to my Cuyahoga peeps. Got this mug they gave me 10 years ago. I'm still using it. So we're very happy to be supporting libraries here.
And this is what this is all about. One of the main things is to support libraries. And I love libraries. So that fits right in with what my allegiances are.
Absolutely.
But I just want to talk about False Witness. And this is your new novel. When did it come out? A few days ago?
Last Tuesday. Yeah, I had an event in Woodstock at Foxtail bookstore. Well, I had two events because they didn't have enough books, so I had to go back Wednesday.
And so it's been out going on a week, and it's a standalone.
Yes,
not in the Sarah and Will series or anything like that. But let me tell you, I'm gonna let you tell what the book's about because I want you to set the parameters because I don't want to give away spoilers.
Yeah, it's really hard to talk about my books without spoilers because usually I open the book with or something really nasty happening and you can't say what it is. But we can say that two sisters are involved in the horrible thing. And what takes place is set in the past. And we catch up with them in the first chapter 20 years later, Lee Collier and her sister Callie. And we find out what that traumatic event has done to them and how it's changed the course of their lives in very tangible ways. And Jackie, I like to write about trauma and to explore what trauma does to people. And we know all kinds of things about childhood trauma, for instance, like, if you have an abusive or traumatic childhood, you're more likely to have a predilection toward alcoholism, drug abuse, depression, gives you heart disease, diabetes. I mean, there's just all these horrible things that can happen to adults, but that's not even really taking in the profound psychological changes that can happen. And so this is really a more psychological book in a lot of ways. There's still a bad guy and there's some police officers, but not a lot. But it is a story at its heart about how people survive trauma.
Well, when you sit down to write False Witness or something like that, I found out recently that you have a cabin in North Georgia that you go there to write. Do you just turn off all the lights and get in a somber, dark place and start in and do it? Or do you fill the room with light and say, I got to contradict what I'm writing?
Well, I did. Sometimes I'll forget to open the blinds in the morning and I'll get really sleepy. So that's my first cue is if I start nodding off before lunch that I should open the blinds and let some sunlight in. But, I like things very calm. I'm not one of these go to a coffee shop sort of authors. I can't listen to music. It has to be me and my thoughts. And that's how I've always done it. I love that isolation that I have in the North Georgia mountains. And it's a cabin my dad built for me many years ago, which was nice. I mean, I had to pay for it, but he was the general contractor on it. And I just, I have kind of a Pavlovian response now when I go up to the cabin because I just focus on the story. And that's when I think of myself purely as a writer and think about what I'm going to do next in whatever book I'm working on.
I was in describing you, I was thinking about it, and I'm going to say it now. I was just going to say it then, but your books are deep and riveting and dark sometimes, all this sort of stuff. But you are one of the funniest people I know. And in your books, even in the midst of everything, you bring in humor. And for me in this book, it's not giving anything away with the plot, but the cat names, that just, I was sitting here laughing out loud when Callie, one of the sisters, rattled off all the names that she had given to the different cats in the story. That was hilarious. I
love a good pun, Jackie. I can't really pass that up. But, Callie loves animals. And I think that's one of the things that makes her most understandable. And from just a technical perspective, any metaphor or simile she's going to use is going to be based in an animal. Whereas anything Lee does in that nature is going to be about open spaces like the ocean or waves, or, it's just a way to identify them. But you can't have just really dark stuff without some lightness. There has to be some balance. And I love those moments.
You interjected at just the right time. It's like you're going, oh my gosh, oh my gosh, oh my gosh. And then there'll be this little spot, this perfect timing just to bring you back and let you know that these people are human, that they're not just one side or the other. They have human loves, pets, whatever. And it just goes with it. But your metaphors and similes, I was going to look it up before I started tonight, but you have one sentence or one part of the book. You can tell I love this book. But you talk about a woman had pearls on, and you said they looked like, and you named the animal, but I forgot what the animal was. You said it looked like a raccoon's orthodontia or something like that. Do you remember that?
Oh yeah, the teeth, yeah, the pearls.
Yes.
Yeah.
And all I could see there were teeth hanging around her neck. Yeah, but those the story is full of those things when you say, and it was just like such and such, and they tie right in. So,
well, also this was my opportunity because I've been collecting obscure animal facts for years, just because I love them. I mean, I love that octopuses are the assholes of the deep sea, that they'll just go up and punch a fish for no reason. or that mice, in the wild, if you put a wheel, like a running wheel that you'd see in a gerbil cage in the middle of a field, mice will get on it and they'll go for hours. They just love it. I mean, stuff like that I just find fascinating.
Karin, how do you know that?
You know what, Jackie? I can't remember half the crap on from the SAT. I took French for 3 years. There's so much I haven't retained, but I learned about that mouse wheel like 5 years ago, and it's stuck in my head.
It'll be in mine forever. I will tell you that.
I only remember the important things.
Yeah, well, that's important. Also, and this is, I'm probably going to get people complaining about me saying this, but one of the heroes in this story is named Walter. And I don't know why that struck me. It was just so ordinary that he was named Walter. It wasn't Bruce or I don't know who else, the
Digger.
Rock or whatever.
Yeah.
It was just Walter. And he is one of the richest characters in the story.
Well, I like Walter a lot because he's Lee's husband, estranged, but he's a good guy, And the thing is, his name actually comes from my publicist in Belgium, my Flemish publisher, and his name is Walter, and he's just a great little guy, and have spent a lot of time with me. He gave up promoting books, and now he works for like some human rights thing, which is a travesty because he was such a great seller of my books. I took it very personal when he left. But he's just one of those nice guys, and I was thinking about that Walter when I wrote Lee's Walter, because I thought, I want him to be nice, but I want him to have a limit to his niceness. And I want him, if you're a guy and you're with someone like Lee, who's very type A, very driven, then you choose what's important to you, right? Otherwise you'd be fighting all the time. But when you put your foot down, she knows that you mean it, and there's no crossing that.
Well, Walter, again, I just liked a hero named Walter. But also, Lee is an attorney, and then another character has drug addiction problems.
Mhm.
I learned more about drugs than I had ever known in my life. What kind of research did you do? And did you actually talk to addicts or people who have that problem?
I did, and I talked to some addicts in recovery and some who are not in recovery. And I just wanted to present as realistic a picture of an addict as I could without going to like the binary, they're a useless junkie or they're a thief or they're manipulative or they're untrustworthy, which all addicts can have varying degrees of that because they are controlled by an addiction, right? So they've abdicated their personal choice to this drug, whether it's from a physical, emotional, there's all kinds of dependency, right? And I think everybody I know has a family member or a friend who struggled with addiction. And I think it's very important to separate the base personality from the addiction because there are some real assholes who are addicts and there are some really nice people who are addicts. And, for me, I wanted to write about this very tenderhearted, nice person who has this addiction. She knows she has the addiction. I mean, addicts, for the most part, are not stupid. That they know what they did wrong. They know the choices they made that put them on this path. But I also wanted to talk a little bit about the fact that what we're doing just as a country is not working. The war on drugs. Can you imagine if we spent those trillions of dollars making schools and social services and children's agencies and hospital care and mental health care stronger than they are, rather than, spending all this money bombing people in Nicaragua or whatever? If we just spent the resources here and stopped the number of people who reach to drugs for some sort of relief, right? Or who fall into addiction. And, AA is great if it works for you, but by their own statistics, it works for about 5% of the people who are in the program. NA is not as effective as other treatments for narcotics addiction, especially heroin. We know medically assisted withdrawal is the best, or maintenance doses, and we're doing that a little bit in the United States, but if you look at other countries who have said, okay, well, these people aren't going to get off heroin. Let's give them a clean supply of the drug at a maintenance level so that they're not breaking up the families. They're not on the street. They're not committing crime. They're not, going to the hospital and overdosing and all this. And that's not going to solve all the problems, but it can solve some of the problems just by giving them the treatment they need that meets them where they are, rather than holding up this one size fits all sort of treatment. So that I wanted to talk a little bit about that, because I think we're really at a point in America where we're looking at the stuff we're doing and saying, hey, this isn't working. So, how can we change the system to make it work for more people?
And, now it used not to be this way. I'm a lot older than you are, but they throw around the figure of, we'll spend so many trillion. I mean, I'm a million person that I'm impressed, but now they're talking about trillions. And think, like you say, if that money was devoted, or even a large part of, to drug rehabilitation or whatever, what could be done? Because it could be done.
Right. And it's across the board. I mean, look at how many vets we could help. Yeah. If we really met them where they are. And, we know all kinds of psychedelics can help with PTSD treatment if it's managed properly, but we're not studying it because, I don't know, Nixon was afraid of the wacky tobacco and mushrooms and counterculture. I mean, most of our drug laws are a response to counterculture or minorities. They're not really based in a lot of fact and science anyway.
But you not only, had that element in the book, you also did it in the age of COVID. Mm-hmm. And I always wonder how people are going to write, are they going to write books like COVID doesn't exist, or we're past COVID, or we're pre-COVID, but you tackled it head on. And
yeah. Well, I mean, I guess we should say the book is not about the pandemic. It just takes place during the pandemic. And that's what I wanted. Right. And I was real careful just to put some in. I mean, there's not a lot of passages about it. People are socially distancing, they're wearing masks and that sort of thing. But I wanted to capture life as it is for certain people. You know, Lee is a lawyer. So right off the bat, you know, she's doing a jail visit. She catches COVID very early on. Then Callie, who lives a life sort of on the margins, you know, of course, she's exposed just because of her life. She's out there. She doesn't have the luxury of doing what we get to do, which is sit behind a computer and be at home. She's out there because she has to work. She has to have a job. She has to be making money. She has to live. So it was a good way.
So many people do.
Exactly. So it was a good way to talk about that contrast in how people were able to write out what hopefully was the worst part of the pandemic. Hopefully that was as bad as it's going to get, though I know it's getting worse now. But, you know, I wanted to show that difference. And I wanted to capture some of the things like the fact that everywhere you go in Atlanta, all the hand sanitizer has come from distilleries because they stopped making booze and started making hand sanitizer. So you're like, remember when you were in school and your teacher would pass out a Ditto and you were smelling it? Because you get high off the ink. Well, so everybody's smelling their hands like, oh, I got rum, I got tequila, you know? So, I mean, that's something I don't think we'll remember maybe in 10 years when we're hopefully past the pandemic. But also, I remember reading Pale Horse, Pale Rider when I was in college.
You referenced that in your notes.
Yeah, yeah. So Georgia State, woohoo, Panthers. You know, so I read it, and you know, of course, you study the flu pandemic in 1918 in school. They have a chapter on that in your textbook. But it really came alive for me when I read Pale Horse, Pale Rider, because Catherine Ann Porter herself experienced the pandemic, right? She was alive during that time. She caught the Spanish flu. But the similarities were really startling, like the fact that, you know, there was a lot of xenophobia about Spain because of it, even though we now know it probably came from Oklahoma. And the language changed, right? So they started talking about immigrants as filthy and dirty and germy. And, you know, instead of just, oh, we don't want immigrants, they're like, they're disease ridden. But her temperature went so high that her hair turned white. She was worried about losing her job. She was worried about getting kicked out of her apartment. She was worried about her boyfriend dying from it. She couldn't get in a hospital for several days because there just was no availability. I mean, those are things that are very similar to what we experienced during the pandemic. So I thought, let me capture this a little bit in my own work, and hopefully, you know, it'll stand the test of time, and people can say, wow, I can't believe how crazy our lives were.
Yeah. Reflect back and just be glad in the future that we're over it, hopefully. But I always talk too, your books to me are very emotional books. You write, you know, in your other series, the Sarah Will relationship is just one of my favorite couples in literature. But in this one, you are so good at creating and describing the bond between sisters. That just is tangible in that book, of how much Lee and Callie are devoted to each other. And, you know, you have a sister, do you not?
I do. I have two older sisters. One is much older than me, and she got married when she was 17, so she was out of the house. But my middle sister, I'm closer to, and she's 3.5 years older than me. And I love writing about sister relationships because they're so fraught, you know, and there's just a language sisters speak that goes back years that people who are just coming onto the scene don't quite understand. And your sister's a person you can love the most and hate the most at the same time. So it's good for me, I think, just from a writer standpoint, to talk about relationships that are a little difficult. So I really like writing those, but I've written them a couple of times now, and I wanted to find out who Callie and Lee were. And the thing about them is they had this horrible thing happen to them when they were younger. And whenever they're together, they're reminded of that horrible thing. And so it's hard for them to be together. They're not estranged, but they're in the same space by necessity generally, like something bad has happened or one of them is in trouble and needs something. They're always there for them in the bad times, but the good times, it's really hard for them to be together.
Now, it's all right because they've got an attraction to each other, but then a repulsion that comes in. So it's click, not, but that relationship just, is beautifully drawn. And especially because they come from such currently two different worlds, and yet they're still there, in the relationship. So I was fascinated too, because in the book, Callie, the sister, then tell me if her name is pronounced her full name, Calliope.
Yeah, or Calliope.
Calliope.
If you've been to Mississippi, that's how they say it there. There's a Calliope, Mississippi. And when I was growing up, I read a lot of books, and words like that, I just in my head said them how they looked on the page. And so like Persephone was one of them. When the first time somebody said that, I was like, isn't that Persephone? Because I just had no idea how they were pronounced because I didn't hear them in Jonesboro growing up. So, it was a play on that. But I like the idea of her having a name that, it makes her very different from everybody else, and it's also a signal if someone really knows her, whether or not they say Calliope or Calliope.
And Lee's name is Harley.
Yeah. Well, they do have an awful mother who
Phil. Love Phil.
Yeah.
Hated Phil. Phil, but love Phil.
Yeah. So she gave them these names, these very peculiar names, and she told them basically the story of Top Gun to say who their father was, and they didn't realize until they saw the movie that Goose was actually not their father's name. He's just a character in a Tom Cruise movie.
And again, going back to your sense of humor, which the fact that Phil is not named Phil, but is called Phil because she walks around with a baseball bat. That just struck me funny too. I thought that was funny.
I play with names a lot in the book, and it goes in with Callie having different names for cats and things like that. And she talks about how many aliases cats tend to have. And I think that a lot of people who have a duality to them go by different names, at different points in their lives.
I did it. I went off to church camp one year and I changed my name completely, different personality, the whole thing.
Yeah. So, it's a great way to reinvent yourself.
My name, Karin, was Rock Dixon.
Good Lord.
Yes, that was it. And all the people in my group went along with it. We go to church camp, hey, Rock, you want to do this? This was back in the 50s when Rock Hudson was a really big star.
Right. Yeah, they weren't Googling you.
No. But it was, it was a fun feeling just to change your name and background, the whole thing.
I guess there's probably a porn star named Rock Dixon, Jackie.
Probably is.
I hope people please don't Google. Library ladies, don't Google this.
No. I only did it for that 1 week. So
okay,
that was
sure.
it. That was
sure,
it.
Jackie. Right? Yeah.
Yeah. And maybe there was that time in Vegas, but no. So where did the germ of this idea for the book come from?
It really started with Lee, and it was about 3 years ago. I was working on one of my Will and Sarah books, and one of the things I have to research a lot about is Faith, because she's got a child, and I don't have children that I know of. And so I read a lot of mommy blogs. Well, yeah, and Jackie, I can't stand children. It's like babies; they can't even hold their head up. It's like, what is the point? So Right. So I read these mommy blogs, who, by the way, can't stand children as much as me, apparently. And I saw this cartoon that said the kids you see at the school musical. And it was the nose picker, the mama's boy, the stage hog. And my first thought was, oh my God, it never even occurred to me that parents have to sit through this crap, right? Because it's not something I ever thought about. I've seen it in movies. I didn't know it was real life. That would be too horrible. And so I thought about Lee sitting in the audience, seeing these different characters on stage, and Walter's with her and he's playing fantasy football. And she gets the idea to play like fantasy mom apocalypse. What mom would I want on my team if shit got real, right? So she's picking the one who made the math teacher cry, and the one who punched a dog who tried to bite her kid, and the one who like hoarded toilet paper in the early part of the pandemic, the one who sleeps with anybody. So she's like building out her team to survive the apocalypse. And that's what the germ of the story was. And then I just kept thinking about her over the ensuing 3 years. And, suddenly she had this sister, and suddenly they had this bad thing happen. And so about February of 2020, I meet with my editor generally when we can, face to face, when HarperCollins, my publisher, has their sales conference for the international folks in Miami. And so, that's not a bad place to go in January, February. So I was with her talking through the book, and, she just kind of listens to me as a sounding board, and I talk about the structure and that kind of thing, because obviously she's got to take this information back so they can make jackets and marketing or whatever. And so we were like thinking about the pandemic in terms of, well, it wasn't a pandemic yet. Like, oh, well, it's made it to America. These poor people in Seattle in these rehab facilities. We were kind of tracking that, but not really thinking it's going to be a big thing. And by the time I got home, I went to the grocery store and there was nothing. It was like, oh my God. And I texted her and she said, same here, Tesco, nothing. And and then the lockdown happened, and I started thinking about the story. And there was one problem that I had that I couldn't figure out how to solve. And that is that Lee's 16-year-old daughter does not live with her. She lives in the suburbs with her husband, Walter. And the pandemic solved that problem because, Jackie, you don't know this about women, but women are really awful to each other. No more so than we're judging their mothering skills. And I knew if Lee wasn't living with her daughter, women would hate her and think she was a bad mother. So they like turn against her immediately, right? And so the pandemic gave me an excuse because the daughter's living in the suburbs. It's safer. It keeps her away from COVID. She's able to go to this fancy school that's costing a fortune so that she doesn't have to do virtual learning. So it's a good thing rather than Lee's abandoned her child and she's a bad mother. So that started me thinking, wow, maybe I should write this during the pandemic and I can talk about these different issues in a way that I love talking about, but that the pandemic has really magnified, like, the haves and the have-nots, the fact that, we have billionaires donating parks and land and stuff when they just paid. If they paid taxes, then we could do it ourselves as a country. So things like that. I thought this is a good opportunity to incorporate what's going on in the real world into this story.
You come out basically one book a year.
Mm-hmm.
While you're waiting for like False Witness to be published or whatever, edited or whatever it is, have you already got the next book plotted out?
Not plotted out, but I always have a lot of different stories in my head. Like I have an idea for a Will and Sarah book, but it's not ready yet. So it's not going to be next year, but it'll be the year after. Because if it's a book that I'm going to write, I'm going to spend a lot of my time with it, and I need to really feel interested and passionate about it. And so the next book is more of a standalone, just because this story came to me, and I thought, this seems like a good time to write it. But I've been thinking about this story that I'm working on now for probably, I don't know, 8 or 9 months as I was writing False Witness. So, that's generally how it's been. By the time I finish a book, I've got an idea for the next one.
Well, speaking of Will and Sarah, there was talk of a TV series on those books. Is that still a possibility?
Well, it's still optioned, and they renewed the option. I think they're trying to find a script that works. And I have a lot of faith in the writer, because we talked a lot about the books and the character. And, I had, she was in Atlanta directing or shooting another TV series, and I had dinner with her, and she said to me, I've got to know, why did Jeffrey cheat on Sarah? And I thought, that's a real fan, right?
Yes.
So
that's somebody's dug into the books.
Exactly. Yeah. So I thought, wow, this is somebody who really understands and is thinking about the story in a very thoughtful way. So she's the one working on it. We'll see what happens. It's Hollywood. That they spend a lot of money developing things and they don't go anywhere. But I really like the team on it. And Pretty Girls has also been optioned. And we'll see about that. Yeah.
And
when they
say
and Pieces of Her. Yeah. Pieces of Her is
already being shot.
Yeah. Yes. They were filming in your neck of the woods. They were at St. Simon. They filmed in Atlanta. I got to see the set, and it was so weird. This thing I wrote in my pajamas 3 years ago. Here are hundreds of people acting it out in cars and, extras, and we were at Underground, and it was just fascinating to see it, and they were so generous. The bulk of it, though, was filmed in Australia, because they were going to film in Vancouver, but then the pandemic happened, and the producer's Australian. Toni Collette, who's the star, is Australian. Netflix loves Australia, so they're like, let's just go to Australia. And Australia took the virus very seriously. I mean, their population is with California, but they've had, I think, fewer than 1,000 deaths. So they were very careful about tracing and tracking and quarantining. And they filmed there for 3 months. Didn't have any shutdowns because of COVID, which is laudable. Tells you how safe they're being and making sure everybody's okay. Then Atlanta, and now it's wrapped. So we'll see when it comes out. Netflix hasn't announced it. They have a special formula, I guess, for when they air things. But as soon as I know, everybody will know whether they want to or not.
But it is a series.
Yeah, 8 episodes. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I'm a big Toni Collette fan, so
she's amazing, right? Yeah. I mean,
did they get all excited though when you came on set? They would say like, "Oh my gosh, Karin Slaughter's here."
They were really nice. I've met some of them before. I actually, Charlotte, who's the head writer, I met with her when I was in New York. Weirdly, I had just gone to Sue Grafton's memorial, and then I met with Charlotte and Leslie Linka Glatter, who's also a producer. She's an amazing director. She's directed everything from like Homeland to Hill Street Blues and Wapiti Blue. Like, she just has an amazing repertoire. But I had lunch with them after the Sue Grafton memorial, and all I could think of was Sue always saying she was never going to let them adapt anything for television because she was afraid they would just. She wrote for MASH. I mean, she was pretty incredible, and she knew what television could do to your baby. But I just felt really comfortable with them. They really understood what I was trying to do with the story. I've read all the scripts. I mean, they had to make changes because part of the book, Andy's in a car driving around, which is not riveting television, So I agree with the changes they made. And I'm super excited about it. I can't wait to see it. I've been getting lots of sneak peeks and things. So I'm anxious for people to be able to see it.
This is a question out of that atmosphere, but have you read a book called We Begin at the End?
No.
By Chris Whitaker?
Mm-mm.
I want you to, it is just an amazing book. It just completely hit me. And it just came, I just kind of reached into the stack they sent me and randomly picked this book up, which I never do. And it was just blown away by it. And I think you'd like it. So
okay, great. Well,
I recommend it.
I'm reading Unwell Women, which is nonfiction about how crappily women have been treated by the medical sciences back to Hippocrates. And just, gosh. Yeah, all the suffering and horrible things that women went through. What the funniest thing is, they're talking about how women, they didn't, it was illegal to autopsy anyone, right? To cut someone open. And so they just had to guess what was going on there. And they believed that a woman's womb traveled around her body. That's why she had her period. And if she was mouthy, then you just feed her something really bitter and chase the womb back down, So just brilliant things like that. And it's really fascinating though. And also horrifying, we know about Henrietta Lacks, the horrible experiments done on slaves, women who were slaves without their consent, the gynecological stuff. But it just really is a well-researched book into how screwed all women have always been.
Karin, you've lived here in Georgia most of your life.
Almost.
Do people just accept the fact that you're Karin Slaughter and you write bestsellers and, nothing out of the ordinary? Are they in awe and approach you and, oh, there's Karin Slaughter?
Well, it depends on if I'm at a bookstore and someone recognizes me, it's a little different. But I've had the same friends for 20 years and, they're very not impressed with me. And, a couple of weeks ago, I got a call from my editor in England. She was so excited. And she was calling to tell me that I had hit #1 on the list in the UK and Ireland. And she said, "What are you doing?" And I was scooping the litter box. So, that helps keep it real. That's my glamorous life, is scooping the litter box while I'm getting this wonderful phone call. But I'm really grateful for my readers because they make it possible for me to keep writing and doing what I love for a living, which not many people can say that they get to do exactly what they want to do as a career. So I'm super grateful for them. And, I hopefully they just see me as an average person who scoops litter.
And writes bestsellers.
If I'm lucky.
Yeah, well, you've been pretty lucky all the time, so yeah. we could say that about you. Who is your favorite character that you created? Is there anyone that you really enjoy writing about more than others? Or
well, I'm kind of a love the one you're with. Okay. I love Sarah. I've been writing about her from the beginning of my career. And I love that she's changed as I've changed. And, I've written about her at different points in her life. And it's fun to think back on all the crap I've put her through. And
she has been through it.
But like when you're in your 20s, you just have like this certain belief. It's why people online are so unforgiving, because it's mostly young people who have never made a horrible mistake, and then you get into your 30s and you've made some mistakes and you're a little more forgiving, but you're also like, oh my God, I can't believe I wasted 10 years of my life. And now I need to get a mortgage and pay off my student loans. And, you kind of just scramble to catch up. And then you get in your 40s and you're like, fuck it. So, I've been with Sarah and she's been with me through all those different stages. And she's a lot of fun to write about, but I love writing about Will too. And a lot of people like Will, but I have to remind them, look, you get to be in his head. So those 3 pages where he's thinking all these thoughts, Sarah only hears him say, "What do you want for dinner?" So, but Amanda's always fun to write because she's got these wonderful little emasculating quips that she throws Will's way. And, Lena is someone who a little bit of her goes a long way. Yeah. I wrote about her in The Silent Wife, and it was nice to catch up with her, but Lena's doing okay right now. But there's some people who still are hating on her for what she did back in Grant County, which is great, right? That they still remember her when she was just young and stupid, as opposed to a little older and still a little stupid.
I watch comments that you get, and people have this vast Karin Slaughter knowledge through, I mean, to my minutia, which is just amazing. But I get to, when I'm talking to people, you know, and they say recommend an author, and I'll say Karin Slaughter, and they'll say, "Oh, I hear she's dark. She's so dark." And I said, "Yeah, but you know that going in,
right?
I mean, you know, you don't go in expecting rainbows and unicorns or whatever. But do you ever think, oh gosh, maybe I better not be as explicit or be as detailed, or does that just challenge you to go further?"
Well, I want to always make sure that I'm putting it in context. I don't want to feel exploitative and I think honestly, yes, I do take an unflinching look at these things, but I think that if my name was Ken Slaughter, people wouldn't say that I was dark. They would just say, wow, you know, he's a great writer. Yeah. I love his stories. And part of the reason why I don't shy away from talking about the details is because when I was growing up, my grandmother was getting the hell beaten out of her by my grandfather. And as a little girl, we would go after Sunday sermons to my grandmother's house, and she would cook Sunday dinner for all of us. And sometimes she would have a black eye or a busted lip, occasionally a broken bone. And my uncles would tease her about being clumsy. And as I got older, I was like, well, wait a minute, nobody's that clumsy. My grandfather's beating her, and we're not talking about it. And not talking about it only protected my grandfather. It never helped her in any way. And so when I wrote my first novel, I made the decision, and I'm not going to soften this up. I'm not going to make it, you know, fade to black. I'm going to write about it for what it is, so you understand what's happening. Because we do have a softening of the language, especially when it's violence against women. You know, we don't say rape. We say, you know, hurt or assault, or we really don't call it what it is. Like I just saw the obituary for, is it John McAfee who did the virus software? I know it's McAfee, but they were talking about him and talking about how he dated several teenage girls when he was an adult. And I thought, no, he didn't date teenage girls. He molested underage girls. Right. And I was mindful of that also writing the opening of False Witness, because the very first part of the book takes place a few years after we had the Long Island Lolita case, right? And so you had Amy Fisher, who was a teenage girl. Yes. She was being exploited and molested by a grown man, trafficked by a grown man. And she was the bad guy. Now she did commit a crime. She attempted murder on the man's wife, but we kind of just took away as a society her girlhood. And we do that a lot to young women. You know, we don't accept their young women if we're going to sexualize them, which says a lot more about us than it does about them. But we don't. You know, and we see this with a lot of young men, especially men of color. When they commit a crime, they're no longer boys, they're men. And that's how they're described. So when I write about these things, I want to write about them as they are. And they're not pretty, and they're not sexy or romantic or any of those other lies. It's horrible. And the real work for me as a writer comes when I talk about what happens afterward. You know, how did these people move on? What do the survivors do? How do they heal themselves? What does this do to the community? What does it do to Will, who investigates it, or Faith, or Sarah, who's the medical examiner? How does that impact their lives? Because every crime has ripples that we don't even see, sometimes for years.
And you know what I found particularly true in False Witness is people are having these horrible things happen to them, still have to go on with their lives. They still have to have food. They still have to have a place to live. They have to have a job in so many. And you think, oh, these horrible things happen and time stands still, but it doesn't. Time keeps going on, and they're dealing with it while they're coping with life.
Exactly. Raising families, doing it. It kind of reminds me, I'm always interested in how the press will talk about an airplane collision or an accident, and they'll say, oh, there's 10 survivors, and you think, okay, well, will those people walk again? Will they, we call them survivors, but we really don't think about the scars or the damage that they have to live with.
Listen, we've been we invited people to ask questions. So I'm going to click on this now and ask you some of the questions that our viewers want to know. And the first question, it says, I love the Sarah Will story. Will it continue or has it run its course? Now, we've pretty much answered that, but you might want to add something to that.
Yeah. The thing about Will is he's very complicated. And when I ended Grant County, part of the reason for that was because everybody was getting to be really happy, And so Will has a lot of complications built in. I don't think he'll ever be 100% happy. So that's a good thing. So I definitely feel like I have more stories to tell. And, sometimes if it's a Will and Sarah book, the story's more about Sarah, or it's more about Faith, or like in Criminal, it's more about Amanda. So I've got a pretty good cast of characters that I can focus on to keep telling stories.
All right. Let's see what the next person asks. It says, Karin, what started your love of libraries? Do you have a favorite library and why? Thanks. I am a huge fan of your books.
Ah, very nice.
Yes.
When I was a kid, my favorite library was my Jonesboro library downtown, and my dad would drop me off. He'd go into work on Saturdays and leave me there all day and pick me up. And primarily it was wonderful because it was air conditioned, and I was a tubby little kid living in South Georgia, and you know how hot that gets. But all my loves were there, right? I mean, I read all across the board. I love science fiction. I love fantasy. I love nonfiction. Anything I could get my hands on, I would just read. And it was such a pleasure to be able to have access to that. And it was really life-changing for me because it gave me access to worlds I didn't even know existed, whether it's like a Gatsby sort of world or a Wrinkle in Time sort of world. So I really feel like that changed my life, being able to read these books. And so as an adult, I thought that's something I want to give back to. And that's why I started my Save the Libraries Fund to help fund, my local DeKalb library. We've given a lot of money to, and I just think it's so important that we support them because every writer I know got their start at the library. Lee Child, Mike Connolly, Jeff Deaver, Alafair Burke, we all support libraries. Charlene Harris, Tess Gerritsen. I mean, the list goes on. We love libraries and we support them. And my favorite one still has to be that little one in Jonesboro because that's where I got my start.
I don't know if your library does this or not, but when I go to the library now and I check out a book or whatever, in the little slip they give you, it'll say, you just saved $28.99.
No, they don't say that. We have the self-checkout, so you don't get a slip. I miss those slips, though. I miss the Dewey Decimal System. I'm going to be real honest with you. A library that just like in the last 5 years went from the cards to computerized, sent me some of my cards for my earlier books, and I've got them framed. Yeah.
Oh, sweet. Yeah. I was just always, I've since when I grew up, we didn't have a lot of money. And so the fact that you go to the library and get books for free was just amazing. I mean, where else can you get something for free? And
nowhere.
That was a big thing. And it consistently in my life, wherever we happen to move or whatever, the first thing we check out is the library.
Yep.
Because it's going to be an important part of our lives. So I applaud you for your participation and urge everybody to support their libraries. Let's see, you got another question. All right. Here we go. Karin, what was the first book you remember reading as a child and which book flourished your passion for becoming an author? This is from Jody.
Okay. The first book I remember reading is actually not the first book that I read, because I know that I read Encyclopedia Brown and Nancy Drew and all that stuff. But the one I remember is one my sister read, and that's V.C. Andrews' Flowers in the Attic.
I remember that.
Because I was a young girl and it was all, emotional and, just very feverish, that sort of thing. And fortunately, my sister had turned down all the good pages already, so I could reread those. But I'll tell you this, I didn't realize until I was in a women's studies class in college when this guy, we were talking about books we remember from, our earlier years. And this guy said, well, Flowers in the Attic is disgusting because it glorifies incest. And I was like, oh my God, it does. I mean, that was when it recurred to me. And, if you think about that book, and then I don't know if you remember this, Jackie, but there was a movie of the week with Glenn Close and Ted Danson. And Ted Danson in the movie, let's be clear about that, was molesting their daughter. And the daughter told
I remember that movie.
Yeah, the daughter told on him. And
there's something wrong with Amelia.
Yeah. And the happy ending is Amelia is not going to tempt her father anymore. Glenn Close is going to stop being a cold bitch and she's going to have sex with her husband and they can all stay together. Like, that's the happy ending. So,
wow, that worked out, didn't it?
Yeah, between that and General Hospital, where Luke raped Laura and then they ended up getting married. I mean, I'm surprised my generation could even leave the house, honestly. So that's the book I remember.
I remember that movie. I cannot believe
it. Crazy. But I will say that the book that made me want to be a writer, of course, is Flannery O'Connor, her collection of short stories. And then she has an essay collection called On Mystery and Manners, where she talks about being a writer. That's probably some of the most eloquent words on writing I've ever read.
I just like the way Jody put that question to you about flourished your passion.
It did.
I think Jody's a writer. Aha. Okay, let's see next. All right. I love all of your books. Huge fan. Thank you so much for sharing with us tonight. When can we expect more from Will and Sarah? Or will your next novel of suspense be another standalone novel? And that comes from Tammy Bramblett.
Yes. So standalone next year. I'm working on it now. It has some U.S. Marshals in it. So I'm sort of excited, but also dreading, because I'm going to the school where the marshals train. It's called it's in Glencoe. It's called a FLETC, Federal Law Enforcement Training Center, but it's in Brunswick, where I'm terrified I'm going to be carried away by a mosquito or exsanguinated. So that's been really interesting to just talk to these marshals. I mean, the marshals they're sort of like the Marines. They're sent in with very little support and very little money and told to do everything. So that's been really fascinating. But the book after that, of course, is going to be a Sarah and Will.
So in 2023 or 24?
23.
Oh, okay. All right, I like this next question because people always are so observant. And Amy White says, what is the story behind the toilet paper smiley face on your bookshelf?
Well, so that's Tapao, and he's been with me from the beginning of the pandemic. It was sort of like a sort of bragging, like rap stars wear the heavy gold chains. And I was like, look, I got a roll of toilet paper, man. I'm a high roller. But the little one beside it was actually knitted by one of my readers. I call it Pee-wee. So they've just become a very important part of my life. And I don't want to get rid of them. Hopefully I won't need it because my bathroom's right there. But the funny part is there's a bunch of liquor bottles beside it. And my friends laugh about that because I never drink. I've literally put them up there like for pandemic support. So if people are drinking a little bit more than usual, then they feel like, oh, Karen's doing it too. So it's okay.
If Karen's doing it, it's all right. It's all right. Okay, let's try one more. And we'll see. It said, did you get to pick out the cover for False Witness? That's from Sharon Person.
Well, I mean, that's a good question because you can see that the one with the eyelashes is the Dutch, which, that's kind of disconcerting. It's like it might feel like a hairball if you drink that. This is for the UK. It's a light bulb with blood on it. And there's actually like a ton of conversations about how much blood is too much, is just right. So there are like different iterations of that. And of course, this is the US. But I get input on it. I mean, contractually, I get input, but that doesn't mean approval. And, in foreign countries, I generally think, well, I'm not a consumer there, so I don't know what their market dictates, right? So I kind of just say if I like it or not, or, a lot of times my Dutch jackets have like a woman's face on it. I mean, they're really art pieces, so I'm always pleased with that. With False Witness, I really like it. And so, the thing is, I don't usually give a lot of input. I just say, yeah, I like it or I don't. But with this, I was looking at the woman and I thought her butt looks enormous. And so the note I gave was, can we make her butt a little smaller? And that'll be in my archives at Georgia State one day, is the butt emails.
And she has little teeny hands.
I know. So they shaved down the butt because it's split in the middle and pulled apart. It just looked really butt. And, much to the chagrin of everybody at HarperCollins, I call it the butt jacket. But I do love it. I've been to, the bookstores and I've seen it on the shelves, and I think it's very striking. So I think they did a really great job. They shouldn't listen to me is what I'm saying.
Real quickly, because we're running out of time, but how about titles? Do you get to pick your own titles, or does HarperCollins make suggestions, or
I choose my own titles, and they're very important to me. A lot of times, Jackie, you understand why False Witness is a sort of biblical reference in an oblique way. A lot of my titles have some sort of biblical reference, having grown up in that sort of household. And I think also the Bible is just a beautiful source of stories. I mean, just really beautifully told. Unfortunately, people do horrible things based on bad readings. But, so I really do feel close to my titles, and they kind of set the tone for the story. This one, I think in particular, because Lee is a lawyer. So, there's the whole false witness thing in the legal sense. And then not knowing what the history you're seeing, whether it's the truth or not. So yes, I do get to pick my titles.
There's one title, and I'm going to squeeze this in, but you told me one time you had a book called Beyond Reach.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
You remember the story? You told me of how you reached that title.
No, I don't. I know that it was originally named Skin Privilege in other countries.
You were telling me about Lee Smith, and he writes Jack Reacher.
Lee Child. Yeah, Lee Child.
Lee Child. And he writes the Jack Reacher. And you said that he said something about his book was such and such on the bestseller list. And you said, well, yours was such and such. And he said something like, well, it's not number one. You said, but it's Beyond Reacher.
That's true. That's true. I was teasing
book called Beyond
that.
Reach.
Yes.
Karin, this has been fantastic. I hope everybody's enjoyed it as much as I have. Any last thing you want to say about libraries?
Well, just that I love the libraries. You guys are doing the Lord's work. And I know that the pandemic has been hard, but you've made it possible for a lot of kids to stay online and stay in school. And that's just what libraries are meant to do. They're the backbone of our community. And I support you, and keep doing what you're doing.
And everybody through your library are going out and buying Get False Witness, because it is fantastic. I've enjoyed this completely. Thank you for those who subscribed and tuned in through Zoom. But for now, I'm Jackie K. Cooper, and that's our night.